So I'm going to start over and say welcome, everybody, to the Ethan Allen Homestead Museum. My name is Angie Grove. I'm the executive director here, and welcome to our free monthly lecture series. This is a program that's been going on for over 20 years. I don't know if John Devino's not in the room. He'd be able to tell me the exact year. It's around 25 years where we have given a free public lecture every month. For 11 months of the year. We take December off. So welcome to the May 2025 version. Before I introduce our speaker today, I want to let you know about some of the other events we have coming up. So first up on our schedule is going to be on June 5th, which is a Thursday night. From 6 to 7:30 p.m., we are going to have a new exhibit open house where you can talk with the curator, who is me, and all the artists that did our new exhibit, Voices of the Revolution. The exhibit is untold stories from the Revolution that is interpreted by local artists. There were 10 different artists and art organizations that we worked with to put up that exhibit. So that is a free event to come to the open house and meet the artists on June 5th. Then we have another reenactment coming up on June 21st and 22nd with Warner's Regiment, the original Green Mountain Boys. They'll be here with their muskets, cooking it over an open fire, doing all of the leather working and basket weaving and all of that stuff. So come check that out as well. And that weekend on June 22nd is our June free monthly lecture. And that is going to be a program called Health and Hygiene in the Continental Army by Skye McCarris, who's the lead educator here at the museum as well. And she's been doing reenacting for about a decade, so she's very well versed in the hygiene needed when you live under a tent on the march with the militia. Okay, but today we have one more thing. I would like to thank our corporate sponsors for this program. Please help me thank North Country Federal Credit Union and Burlington Heritage Ford and Toyota, who give a financial donation so that we can host guest speakers throughout the year. Yeah, thank you. So the guest speaker that they've allowed us to host today is a man named Rob Grandchamp. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about him and a little bit about what he's going to talk about. And then he's going to tell you even more. So Rob Grandchamp is an award-winning author of 15 different books on American military history. He received his master's in American history from Rhode Island College, and he's currently a senior analyst with the government. Rob is the past master of the Mount Mansfield Lodge in Jericho, and that's also where he lives with his wife Elizabeth and their children Addison, Mackenzie, and Sawyer. Today, Rob Grandchamp is going to be talking about the Masons here in Vermont, or more particularly the people who tried to get rid of the Masons here in Vermont. So I'm going to let him go into more detail for that, but I would like to start with a question for Rob, which I don't know if maybe he has the answer for. But one question that I get a lot as the director of the museum is, was Ethan Allen a Mason? And if I Google it, I get very different answers. So Rob, maybe you can clear that up for us today.
Well,
yeah.
I can give you the short answer. More than likely, he
took
at least one degree. But Dan O'Neill's the real expert. But there's enough circumstantial evidence that Ethan Allen took at least one of his degrees in Connecticut before he came up here.
Okay. Well, please welcome Rob Grandchamp.
Good afternoon. It's great to be here for probably the 8th or 9th lecture, and seeing some familiar faces in the crowd. And every one of these is a bit different, but this is sort of part 2 of a talk I gave about a year ago here at the Homestead that covered early Masonry in Vermont, sort of how the Masons got here, what they brought to Vermont, and the creation of the Grand Lodge. So if you weren't here for that first lecture, it is available through CCTV on YouTube, and I encourage you to go and watch it. But a little recap to bring us to where we're going to go with the talk today. What is Masonry? if you've watched the old movies, the Nicolas Cage National Treasure movies, or any of the Dan Brown books, the Masons have this conspiracy to take over the world, or they're guarding a national treasure. Well, if I knew where a national treasure was, I wouldn't wake up every day at 4:30 to go to work. There is no conspiracies. There are no national treasures. What Masonry is the world's oldest and largest fraternity. With its origins in the stonemason guilds of Western Europe in the 1300s, and the stated mission of Masonry is to take good men and make them better. And they do that through a system of morality that is veiled in allegory, using some of the tools and symbols and sayings from those stonemason guilds dating back to the building of the large cathedrals in Western Europe in the 1300s. The history of Masonry is a history all in of itself, but we're going to focus today on a little sliver of Masonry that came to Vermont during a period before the Civil War that is really quite remarkable. But again, Masonry comes to Vermont really with the first settlers. Out of Connecticut, we have the Chittendens, the Allens, the Robinsons, and they are all Masons. And they bring the fraternity here to Vermont in the 1760s, the 1770s. And because a lot of those early settlers of Vermont are from Connecticut, Masonry today here in Vermont owes a lot of its origins to the Masons of Connecticut. And the work that we do really, unlike other New England states, New York, really parallels what Masonry continues to do in Connecticut today. But after a while of Vermont becoming its own state in 1791, there were a number of lodges throughout Vermont. When you think of a Mason's Lodge, a lodge is a group of men that's really the local chapter of Masonry. So, for example, I'm a member of Mount Mansfield Lodge number 26. All lodges are named and numbered. And we're in Jericho, and we have members who live in Essex, Jericho, Fairfax, Cambridge. So sort of northeastern Chittenden County area is where most of our members come from. But the lodge is the local chapter. The Grand Lodge is the statewide organization that's in charge of all the subordinate lodges within the state. And unlike other countries, in Europe or elsewhere in the world, in the United States, there's no Grand Lodge of the United States. All 50 states, the District of Columbia, are all their own independent Grand Lodges that don't answer to each other but maintain warm fraternal relations with each other. So the Grand Lodge of Vermont is chartered on October 14th of 1794, a day I know quite well because that is my birthday. And the motto that the Grand Lodge of Vermont adopts is, "The truth is older than the mountains." That's the motto that the early Masons in Vermont adopt. And keep that saying in your mind. The truth is older than the mountains, as we sort of get into the weeds of history here. And Masonry flourished in the early years of the Grand Lodge of Vermont, lodges popping up all over the state. Some of your very prominent early Vermonters, Moses Robinson, Thomas Chittenden, Ira Allen, are all Vermont Masons. And by 1830, there are 73 lodges in Vermont. Masons are involved in many functions of the state. Everywhere from your politicians, your local business owners, business leaders, all the way down to your farmers. Masonry is an organization that embraces men of all walks of life. In a Mason's Lodge, quite literally, everybody is on the level and is equal. Whether you are the governor or whether you are quite literally a farmer right off the farm, out of the barn, everybody is equal in a Mason's Lodge. So the Anti-Masonic movement, how does this come to be in Vermont and embraced in Vermont by really no other state in such a way? Again, Masonry is flourishing in Vermont. By this point, the Grand Lodge is 35 years old as we get into the late 1820s. And this anti-Masonic movement, you talk about a movement traced back to one man. Well, this is quite literally traced back to one man, and that is a fellow named William Morgan. And William Morgan is one of those figures in history that he starts a movement, but trying to get good facts about his life is almost impossible. There's so much mythology, so much information that has popped up over his years that has never been substantiated. We do know that he's born in 1775 around the Culpeper, Virginia area, sort of Piedmont, central Virginia. Morgan claims that he served as a captain in the War of 1812 with a Virginia militia unit, but there's really no evidence that he was a veteran of that war. By trade, he is an operative mason, somebody who's a real mason, a bricklayer. He also is a brewer, runs a beer brewery, and by the mid-1820s, he settled with his family in Batavia, New York, around Lockport, just north of Niagara Falls. And one night, brewing some beer, his brewery catches on fire. And William Morgan is quite literally left destitute and penniless. His entire life savings was in this brewery, and when it catches fire, he needs to make some money. So he needs to come up with some money to support his family, so he decides to write a book, and he titles his book An Exposition of Ancient Craft Masonry. And this is where the facts start to get interesting. Now, he wanted to write a book that would be an expose piece on masonry. Prior to Google, the internet, not too many folks knew what goes on in these Mason lodges. And Morgan wants to write a book that presumes to reveal any of the secrets of masonry. Well, I can tell you, secret-wise, if you join the fraternity to learn the secrets, you're going to be very quickly disappointed. The secrets of masonry, quite literally, the biggest secret is there is no secret. The best part about masonry is the brotherhood. It's the men that you have a meal with, that you take part in the meetings with. But, Morgan, he decides to write this book. Now, was William Morgan a Mason? This is one of those interesting things. Historians have scoured the records of American Masonic lodges from the period. There's no record of William Morgan ever taking any Masonic degrees in the United States. Historians have looked for that information for years. There's no information William Morgan was ever made a Mason in the United States. Now, living in Western New York, he might have taken at least one degree in Ontario, in Canada. But again, there's no information. Was William Morgan even a Mason? If he presumed to write what's going to be this scandalous book about Masonry, we have no idea, was William Morgan even a Mason? But the idea of writing this book catches the attention of a few local brothers in the local lodge in Batavia. And, they hear about the book that he's going to write, and they go to Morgan saying, you really shouldn't write a book about Masonry, telling what goes on in here. And they ask him, please don't publish this. I should add that this was never authorized by any lodge in New York. This was individual Masons going to Morgan asking him not to write this book. Well, Morgan, again, his business burned to the ground, literally. He needs the money. So the book is all set to go to print. Book is all laid out. If you've ever seen an old print shop with the workable type, the book is all set to go to print. Well, quite literally the night before the book is set to go to print, once you know, the print shop is ransacked. And the completed plates of the book and the manuscript are destroyed. Presumably by local Masons, men who are real Masons, who asked Morgan to not write this book. But on September 11th of 1826, William Morgan is arrested by the sheriff of Niagara County, who is a Mason, and he's arrested for really a minor issue. He owed a small debt to someone that he hadn't paid off because his business had been destroyed. And so Morgan is thrown in jail for a few nights, and voila, the debt is paid off by somebody. But he's released on September 14th of 1826, and a few hours later, William Morgan simply disappears. He was last seen alive being rowed across the Niagara River in a rowboat to Canada. The rowboat was being rowed by some Masons. So this is where things get very interesting, because just about a year later, in October of 1827, a body washes up in Lake Ontario. And through certain papers on the body is unidentifiable, if you can imagine being in the water for that time. Through certain papers on the body, it's presumed that this is William Morgan. And remember, he was last seen in a rowboat going across the river, being rowed by some Masons. Well, this gets picked up by the local paper. And in 1828, 4 Masons, including that sheriff, are arrested, and they are put in jail for 2 years for kidnapping William Morgan. But William Morgan is never seen alive again. And this story of Morgan's disappearance really quickly blows up into atomic proportions. Morgan becomes really a free speech symbol. His death is picked up that the Masons are willing to go out and trash a man's business, the print shop, and kill William Morgan to keep silent. What else are the Masons capable of doing? And this is really picked up by the anti-Jacksonians under John Quincy Adams. John Quincy Adams, his party really picks up on Morgan's death. They point that a lot of Andrew Jackson's followers are Masons. Andrew Jackson, before he became president, he was the Grand Master of Masons of Tennessee. He was in charge of all the Masons out in Tennessee. So this is really picked up by John Quincy Adams and his followers, and things just blow out of proportions very quickly. So much so that the first third party in the United States becomes the Anti-Masonic Party. Quite literally, we had a political party running on this, picking up after William Morgan, and Morgan becomes a hero. The body that they pull out of Lake Ontario, it's buried under a 50-foot monument out there in western New York. And again, nobody knows really whatever happened to William Morgan other than he was last seen alive with the Masons. But that's sort of the national view. William Morgan's death leads to this anti-Masonic movement that's picked up in the 1828 election. Of course, the 1828 election, John Quincy Adams wins the presidency, but the anti-Masonry doesn't go away. It actually grows from there after the 1828 election. And here in Vermont, in 1827, after Morgan's death, Grand Master Phineas White, who's the Grand Master of Vermont, the guy who's in charge of all the Masons in Vermont, he puts out a public statement to the people of Vermont and, reminds people that in the United States, as I mentioned, every Grand Lodge is its own independent body. He says that what happened out in New York, it was unfortunate, but it's just a few bad eggs of Masonry. He lists out all the good things that Vermont Masons have done, proceeds to give a list of very prominent Vermont Masons. At this time, probably the most prominent Vermont Mason is Governor Ebenezer Crafts. He was a member of a lodge up in Craftsbury, where he was from. And really, in Vermont, nothing really comes of it. Other than some editorials in the local newspaper in 1828, but it really doesn't blow up in Vermont until after the election. And why does this movement take off? Why does this happen in Vermont? This is really a case of the haves and the have-nots in the minds of a lot of people at the times. People saw Masons. And even though it embraces men from all walks of life, whether you're Governor Crafts or you're a farmer down the road from the governor, a lot of people, a lot of these rural folks who supported John Quincy Adams and his party in the election, they see this as the Masons are plotting quite literally to take over the government. That Masonry has extended into all aspects of American life, that the prominent men in charge, the powerful, the bankers, the business owners, the wealthy landowners, the politicians, well, they're all Masons. So there must be something going on that these folks are trying to take over. And so in 1828, you have the first rumblings of anti-Masonry beginning in Vermont. Protests against lodges happen in Weston, in Randolph, Vermont. Really, anti-Masonry is concentrated, it's almost strange, it's concentrated on the eastern side of the Green Mountains. This is really where a lot of this is taking place, especially up in the Northeast Kingdom. Caledonia County and Orange County were the two biggest places this is all going on. There's some rumblings of it in Chittenden, Franklin County, but it's really Orange and Caledonia counties where this is really going on. And in those two counties, it's really the Baptists, the ministers in those Baptist churches who are leading the anti-Masonic movement. They were teaching their followers that Masonic beliefs conflict with Christianity. Even though Masonry is not a religion, it does have some religious aspects to it. To be a member, you have to be a man who professes a belief in a supreme deity, whether that is Allah, Buddha, God, whatever, quite literally whatever you believe in, as long as it's something, you can become a member. But they are teaching, these Baptist ministers are rallying their members that Masonic beliefs and teachings go against the church, almost as was done by the Catholic Church in the 1700s with that papal bull. But anti-Masonry really comes out of these Baptist churches and spreads. In 1829, there is a rash of destruction of Masonic headstones in Barnett and Peacham, Vermont. If you go to old cemeteries, you'll see very prominently a lot of Masons have the square and compass symbol engraved on their headstone. A lot of those stones in the Peacham and Barnett areas are destroyed during this part of the movement. So Masons, Vermont Masons, really, start publicly disavowing what's going on. They're telling people, what happened in New York didn't happen here in Vermont. We had nothing to do with Morgan's disappearance. But again, the masses are being riled up by these Baptist ministers, and things are starting to happen. Masons' lodges are starting to close. Masons' lodges are very prominently displayed. Quite literally, brothers are taking down the signs. They're taking things out of the lodges, hiding them in their barns, in their basements, because there quite literally is a fear that violence will come to Vermont. Out of all the research I've done on this project, outside of those destructions of those headstones up in Barnett, Peacham area, there really is no physical violence that takes place against Vermont Masons. Their buildings are not destroyed. People are not assaulted. But it's that threat. It's that very public appearance of when you've got a bunch of people parading by torchlight outside of your lodge, it's not a good idea to have a meeting there that night. So in 1828, again, the Anti-Masonic Party comes into being, and in 1832, they're going to nominate United States Attorney General William Wirt for the presidency. He's going to win nationwide 8% of the popular vote. He's also going to get, the only state he will carry will be Vermont. He will get all 7 of Vermont's electoral votes. Yes, back then we actually had more than 3. We had 7 electoral votes in that election. Vermont, though, the legislature, the state house, the state senate is inundated with anti-Masonic party members. From 1831 to 1835, William Palmer of Danville is the governor of Vermont, and he's elected on the anti-Masonic ticket. 4 of our United States representatives from this time are elected on the anti-Masonic ticket. Now, the anti-Masonic party is one of those just fleeting things in American history, because by 1836, it's over. The party that had come together after Morgan's death splits up over the issue of slavery. And these people rallied against the Masons, and then the northern faction of that party, the Anti-Mason party, split off and starts rallying against slavery, and they turn out to go into the Whig Party, which eventually spurns into the Republican Party with the rise of Lincoln as we head towards the Civil War in the late 1850s. So, anti-Masonry, it only exists for just a brief moment in time, but what a brief moment in time it was. The Northeast Kingdom, Orange, Caledonia counties, that's where this really comes out of, and it spreads like wildfire throughout Vermont. You can imagine back then in those days, we don't have the internet, we don't have telephones. It's through these fiery newspaper editorials. The North Star, a newspaper out of Danville, is really the fire-breathing organ of this whole thing throughout Vermont. And you read the editorials of the North Star at this time, and it's just amazing, the calling for the absolute destruction of Masonry in Vermont. But this leads in 1829, Philip Tucker, who's the Deputy Grand Master of Vermont, to write a pamphlet. And the Grand Lodge of Vermont publishes almost 4,000 copies of this 10-page pamphlet to be sent through to a lot of people in Vermont to tell them about what Masonry is. And one of the things that Brother Tucker writes is, as Masons, we have been charged with being an accessory to the abduction of William Morgan, with shielding Masons from just punishment for crimes that may have been committed by them, with exercising influence through the Masonic character over the legislative, executive, and judicial branches of Vermont government, with tampering with juries, with exerting an influence for political preferment of members of the order because of their membership in preference to others, with various blasphemous practices. We have been accused with causing the death of a distinguished Mason, lest he should dissolve his connection with the order, with holding sanctioning principles of variance with religion and virtue, and with assumption to power to judge an individual brother by a law known only to ourselves, and to inflict corporal punishment, even to that of death, upon members who do not agree with us. To each and every one of these charges, as men whose characters are known in this community beyond reproach, and who rely upon accountability, we make this reply. In the most solemn manner, we positively affirm, as each and every one of us we are acquainted with, in no way did we sanction or authorize any of these principles of practices, which all or each of them include in the above. So quite a powerful statement by the Deputy Grand Master, saying we had nothing to do with this. Just let us get on with making good men better. Well, even though those 4,000 pamphlets went out, really makes no difference in Vermont. Tucker's appeal really falls on deaf ears. People continue to embrace the Anti-Masonic movement, and a lot of Mason lodges start closing down throughout the state. Remember, when this started, there were 73 of these lodges in every part of Vermont. But one by one, those lodges, especially up in the Northeast Kingdom, start closing down very quickly because of what is going on. Now, every year, Masons in Vermont in June, the date has changed over the years, but it's now in June, we host something called the Grand Lodge, which is a statewide meeting of all Masons in Vermont where we get together to discuss things, to vote on different things. And in July of 1831, Grand Master Haswell calls a special convention of Grand Lodge to discuss actually shutting down the Grand Lodge of Vermont, permanently disbanding it. And only 39 of those 73 lodges are represented in that 1831 meeting. And Haswell addresses the members present. And he says, Masonic lodges have existed in Vermont for nearly half a century. They are older than our state government. We have existed as a Grand Lodge since the year 1794, a period of some 37 years. And what have Masons in Vermont done that this widespread ruin should visit us? We have made repeated and solemn appeals to our fellow citizens, our neighbors, and those endeared to us by the most solemn ties of kindred and fellowship. In return, we have been met with reproach and persecution. In return, we have met with our rights as Masons, our rights as freemen abridged, and our characters trampled upon. What shall now be done? Will you permit me to answer the question? Breast the storm, brothers, and when the calm secedes, and the moral ruins shall be made right, an injured and insulted public will reinstate our rights and visit the despoilers with infamy and disgrace. So Grand Master Haswell puts the vote to the brothers present in July of 1831. Are we going to disband the Grand Lodge of Vermont? The vote is 99 to 19 to keep the Grand Lodge going. So those 99 brothers who showed up to support keeping the Grand Lodge of Vermont going quite literally saved the organization that continues to make good roads in our communities to this day. Again, the North Star newspaper up there in Danville, they're publishing some really rile commentaries saying Masonry must be annihilated. The temples must be destroyed. They see a parade of Masons on the street in Montpelier and insult them in their small costumes and gaudy outfits. They publish lists of members of the community, businessmen, who are believed to be Masons, and telling people to boycott their businesses. Telling folks, some of the state representatives who are still Masons and in power, trying to get them voted out. So again, that North Star newspaper does a lot of damage to Masonry in Vermont. By 1833, there's another vote by Grand Master Haswell to disband the Grand Lodge of Vermont. But again, it is upheld by a large margin to keep Masonry alive in Vermont. But by now, in 1833, there are only 10 lodges active from that 73, from just a few years earlier. Grand Master Haswell issues notice to members to meet discreetly. Stop hosting meetings in your lodges. If you're going to gather, meet in small groups, in the woods, in barns, in attics, trying to keep the public away from what we are doing. And in that 3 years later, however, as anti-Masonry is already moving out the door, as the party is already fractured over the issue of slavery, the damage has already been done here in Vermont. 1836, Grand Master Haswell issues an edict that suspends the meetings of the Grand Lodge and meetings of subordinate lodges in Vermont as a whole. He says that until the craft shall gather again, all officers will remain in their chairs, and we will rise out of these ashes. Brothers are instructed to carry on the ritual work. The ritual work that's done, only one copy of that was ever written down. It's passed from word to mouth. Brothers are asked to continue passing that ritual work along so it is not forgotten. Only one lodge continues to meet in this period after 1838. That's Missisquoi Lodge, number 38, up in Berkshire. And they are the only lodge during this period that continues to meet to carry on Masonry in Vermont. But as now the 1840s come around, sort of progressing, now with the era of American expansion, manifest destiny, Masonry is starting to get a resurgence. What had happened in the late 1820s, the early 1830s, is quite literally almost forgotten. And so Haswell, who's still the Grand Master, he was Grand Master for, I believe, 20-something years. Today it's only a 2-year term. But Haswell and his Deputy Grand Master, Philip Tucker, the Deputy Grand Master is the number 2, Haswell and Tucker are directly responsible for keeping Masonry alive in Vermont as we know it today. And so in 1845, these two men start to pick up the pieces of where they left off. And they start writing to people who they knew were Masons. And they're asking if people are even still alive. We didn't know where the Grand Lodge records were, the records of the Grand Lodge of Vermont. Brother Haswell doesn't even know if the Grand Junior Warden, who was the number 4 Mason in the state, if he was still alive. No idea what even happened to him. But November 30th of 1845 really begins the phoenix rising from the ashes of Vermont Masonry. Haswell and Tucker on that date really start bringing Vermont Masonry back to life. On January 14th of 1846, those two men gather as many Masons as they can find. They only number 50. And they come back to a special meeting in Burlington. And at that meeting, the charters of 10 lodges are reinstituted. All of those brothers were from Northwest Vermont, Chittenden and Franklin counties. Lodges such as Washington Lodge in Burlington, Seneca Lodge in Milton, McDonough Lodge in Essex had kept Masonry alive underground. And from there, from those 10 lodges that come together in January of 1846, it quite literally is a phoenix rising from the ashes. Just as quickly as Masonry almost disappeared in Vermont, by the late 1840s, the late 1850s, and especially the period leading up to and after the Civil War, Masonry flourishes throughout Vermont. Lodges are chartered all over the state. So much so that by 1875, there's over 100 Masonic lodges in Vermont. A remarkable period in just 20 years. By 1875, there's almost 20,000 men who are Masons in Vermont in over 100 lodges chartered all over the state. And so quite literally, if Haswell and Tucker had not done what they did and keep that organization going, the Grand Lodge of Vermont would have ceased to exist. But circling back to the Anti-Masonic movement, the Anti-Masonic party as a movement, it's one of those things in American history that flashes up and disappears very quickly. And we might see that in where we are living today in the world, that these movements are but a moment of time, that they come and go with the passing of time. And as Americans, we have a very unique history. And quite literally, as those people did in the 1820s and the 1830s in Vermont, we are living in history right now. Thank you.
So we have about 15 minutes available for questions.
Yes. Yes, sir.
Lodge versus temple. What's the difference?
So a lodge is a group of Masons that is both a building and a organization. So like for example, if I tell my wife I'm going to the lodge, I'm going to the building. But lodge is also the group of men who are in the building. So it sort of uses both words. Temple, sometimes you'll see Masonic temple as a name given to the lodge. but it's not really a temple per se. It's just another name for the building.
So if there was a lodge in a town,
Yes.
a group of men meeting, is it a safe assumption that they had a separate building?
Yes, a lot of these buildings are, especially in the old days, are part of another building. I'll give you a perfect example up in Guildhall, Vermont, so way up in the Northeast Kingdom. A prominent gentleman up there named Benton, who was a summer resident from Boston. So Benton would go to Guildhall every summer, and the Masons up there, their lodge burned. A lot of Masons' lodges burn over the years, believe me. So Benton financed for the town a library, and the Masons' lodge is upstairs. And you'll see that in a number of Vermont towns. For example, in Stratford, Vermont, the Historical Society is on the basement, the lodge is upstairs. You'll also see a number of lodges in buildings all by themselves. In Richmond, Vermont, quite literally North Star Lodge owns the entire block. And so you have at the bottom floor, you have businesses, you have offices on the second floor, and upstairs is the lodge. So lodges come in all sorts and forms of size. The lodge in Barry, Granite Lodge, you can easily fit 300 or 400 people in that building. If you go to Isle Lamont Lodge up in Isle Lamont, if you fit more than 12 people in that building, it's cozy. So they come in all shapes and sizes. Sir?
So, you mentioned the motto is making good men better.
Yes.
How do you do that?
You know, I'm still trying to perfect myself as a man, but it is done, you know, really through having each other's back. You know, of your brothers. If you see something going on, you know, you try to right his wrongs. You try to correct him. You know, to be a better, upright man. And we all have our faults, and we work through those faults to try to make ourselves better.
Is this like a confession kind of thing, where you just testify to your faults?
No, it's you know, it's one of those things that's hard to explain without explaining it. It's one of those things you just figure it out.
Okay.
Yes.
So you said that up in the Northeast Kingdom, there were Baptist preachers that were particularly inveighing against
Yes.
Masonry. What was it in particular that why the Baptist preachers? What were they focusing on in particular? Like, what's the connection?
So they felt much like the Catholics did prior that they felt that Masonry was a religion rather than having aspects of religion as part of the ritual work, and that they felt Masons were teaching a religion that was against Christian teachings. You know, at this time, you also have to remember there's a lot of different movements going on. We have the Millerites, we have the Mormons, we have all of these different religious organizations, and they're really all trying to get members. You know, so it was, there's a great book called The Burned Over District about religion in Western New York during this period. And there's just so many movements going on. And I think they really saw it as, oh, they're trying to get members. Well, you know, instead of going to the lodge, you should be here listening to my sermon about the world's going to end on this date and go sell everything like the Millerites out in New York. But very, very passionate ministers up in Caledonia County. If you want to pick one town where this was ground zero, it's Danville. Like Danville is the anti-Masonic capital, not just of Vermont, but of the United States, because those editorials coming out of the North Star are printed all over the United States. Sir?
Good question. We toured a museum a couple of weeks ago, a former tavern, and our tour leader demonstrated pulling window shades out of the wall down at the ground level, and made the claim that they were secrecy shades pulled out to keep people from peeking in on Masonic meetings. Does that make sense to you?
It actually does. So over in Moulton Borough, New Hampshire, there's a building on the corner there of Route 25 and I think it's 119, but it's now the Old Country Store. But at one point, it was the town hall, and so you were asking about Mason buildings. So at one point, the building's now a gift shop, but at one point, downstairs was the town hall and post office, upstairs was the lodge, and they had those, what might be called Indian shutters, like interior shutters, to, not let any light in as to what's going on up there. But if you want a good example of that in Moulton Borough, New Hampshire, you can find that. Sir?
So you're saying that there were no secret handshakes or symbols or any of that stuff? Like, on the dollar bill, they say that the pyramid with the eye in it was some evil Masonic thing, or I don't care if it's evil or just, it does seem that they had some sort of secrecy, as you just said.
Well, there are some secrets that Masons will take to the grave, but I can tell you the dollar bill, all that is Dan Brown, whack-nut conspiracy theory stuff. If the dollar bill, believe me, I don't have a printing press in my basement running dollar bills. So
all the anti-Masonic stuff started in Vermont?
So it starts in Western New York in Batavia with William Morgan, but then it spreads. Vermont is really just the big. Pennsylvania, it was really large as well, but no other state embraces this as much as Vermont, to the point of electing a governor and 4 U.S. representatives and giving their electoral votes to the Anti-Masonic Party candidate. Vermont does it better than any other state at this point. So, sir.
Yeah, could you say, thank you for this, you say a little bit more about the anti-Mason movement and then its relationship to the anti-slavery movement?
Yes.
And that process?
Yeah, so by 1836, we've got we backtracked the Compromise of 1820, the expansion of the Fugitive Slave Act. Missouri comes into the Union as a free state, 3630 line. Maine comes in as a free state. We're doing one compromise after another, trying to keep the balance of slave and free states, representation in the Senate, in the House of Representatives, 3/5, all that stuff. But as we move into the 1830s and the 1840s, it's really becoming apparent we just are not going to compromise our way out of this anymore. We are becoming two separate countries. The North, freedom, the South, slavery. And the Anti-Masonic Party existed in the moment. It was embraced by John Quincy Adams in Massachusetts, Thurlow Weed in New York. They brought their functions together to fight Andrew Jackson. And it really only succeeded for 4 years because 1832, Jackson is elected anyway and reelected in 1836. So it's a party of the moment, and it tries to hold together. But by 1836, the wheels are really in motion. That slavery is going. There's gonna be a time where we can't compromise out of slavery. And the northern members of this party, keep in mind, John Quincy Adams becomes a very vocal anti-slavery U.S. representative. He actually is probably a better U.S. representative than he is a one-term president. And so when he's a representative, that leads to the gag rule in Congress about not speaking out against slavery. And so John Quincy Adams gets his followers and really transforms his branch of the Anti-Masonic Party into the Whigs, which leads to the Republicans, and we're really getting. I could be here for 2 hours giving antebellum U.S. history, and if you don't mind, I'll give that. But my wife might want me home for dinner. Yes, sir.
I'm kind of curious how somebody became a Mason. They would apply. Did they have to go through a screening process? Was there ritualistic things that they needed to incorporate?
Masons don't recruit. So if you, for example, you wanted to become a Mason, you would have to come to us and say, hey, I want to be a Mason. There'd be an investigation process, and there's an election, and to be elected, you have to be unanimously elected. If there's one, so you might hear the old term blackballing. So in a ballot box, there are white balls and black balls. And if you get white balls, you get elected in. If you get one black ball, you don't become a member.
My father was a Mason and he had a ring.
Okay.
And my first thought, and then the other thought was, now it's sort of just left me, waiting for my turn. Charitable work. Didn't Masons do charitable work?
Yes, Masons even today do lots of charitable work. The Shriner Hospitals, for example, probably the best known example of that. My lodge, we do a lot of charity work in the Jericho, Essex area. For example, tomorrow we're hosting the Memorial Day Parade in Jericho and Underhill. We've been planning that for a few months. We donate a lot of money to the local food bank. Shriners Children's Hospitals, again, not getting into the weeds, Shriners are part of Masonry, but that's just an example of what they do and donate a lot of money to help good organizations. What state was your grandfather a member of? Massachusetts. So the best bet is to get in touch with the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts. One thing about Masons, they like keeping records. I know in Vermont, we have records going back to the 1790s. So more than likely, contact the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts. They'll be able to tell you what lodge your grandfather was in, when he became a Mason, all of his if he was an officer of the lodge. But again, every Grand Lodge is independent, so you'd have to work with the Massachusetts.
Would that ring have been part of the, do Masons get rings or do they?
You have to buy it. You have to buy it. When I got married, I decided to just use my grandfather's wedding ring. So he was married for 62 years, and this has brought me 8 years of good luck. So no, we don't get given rings. Yes, ma'am, back there.
Was there ever a president that was a Mason?
There have been a number. George Washington, for example, Andrew Jackson, Andrew Johnson, Theodore Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt, Truman. Truman was Grand Master of Missouri. The last Masonic president was Gerald Ford. I believe there were 7 or 9 Masons are confirmed to be members. Yes, sir.
So that's very encouraging to me, because when you said that John Quincy Adams was this big liberal and Jackson was probably one of the worst presidents we've ever had, I thought, well, were Masons all racists? But that apparently was not the case with the latter people, anyway.
So during the early part of Masonry, there was very much a race issue. African Americans were excluded in Massachusetts at the beginning. So African American gentleman called Prince Hall from Boston, he started he went to petition the local White Lodge. They wouldn't let him in because he was a free man, African American, and so he started his own version of Masonry called Prince Hall Masonry. Very much today, some African Americans follow the Prince Hall line, but we have in Vermont, as long as you are a man, freeborn, of lawful age, and elected on a unanimous ballot, you can become a member. We don't see color, we don't see religion, as long as you profess a belief in a supreme being.
You do see gender.
It is a fraternity.
Yeah.
I think we're gonna wrap it up. If you have any questions afterwards, I'll stick around for a few minutes before I go get my home cooked meal. But thank you so much to the Homestead, and have a good day.